Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Hunt. I'm the CEO at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and welcome to a new experiment with us. We're launching our first in a webinar series called Building the Future of Regenerative Medicine, Executive Conversations. And this really came out of a number of discussions we had with senior biotech folks in the community and members of our board of directors and others about the real need to be able to bring biotechnology executives together with some of the most important strategic suppliers in the field to wrangle with thorny issues that everybody is struggling with as they try to bring products through the R&D pipeline, manufacture them, and ultimately bring them to patients. And so these discussions, these executive discussions, we think will help people discuss what's going well, challenges they face, real world problems, and how they've overcome them, essentially. And the premise of this is fairly straightforward, which is it takes a village, right? It takes a village, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, it takes an incredible internal team, but it also takes a really important external team led by some of these important suppliers to bring these patients ultimately to medicine. So this is an experiment. It's our first foray into this new webinar series. So I want to thank in advance, Behnam will introduce them, but I want to thank in advance our august panel for doing this inaugural webinar series. And this one, I want to thank Behnam as well and the team at Lonza for being the sponsor of this one. We have subsequent ones that we're queuing up with JLL on buy versus build and manufacturing. And I think that's going to take place in July. And then one that's slotted for either August or September. We're still nailing that down. This one, we've got about 400 people that have registered as of this morning. So we're thrilled with that turnout. And the title of this one is Charting Tomorrow, Strategic Insights on Preparing to Launch Cell and Gene Therapies. And with that, let me just turn it over to Behnam.
Thank you, team. Good morning, good afternoon. Behnam Baghbaderani, Global Head of Program Management, Commercial for Lonza Cell and Gene Therapy. Happy and excited to be on this webinar. As just a brief introduction of myself, I've been with Lonza for 13 years, and over the last 10, 15 years, we've been fortunate to work with several customers and organizations who have been working on developing life-saving cell and gene therapies focused on allogeneic, autologous cell therapies, and viral vector-based gene therapies. Today, in this webinar, we focus on a very exciting topic, Charting Tomorrow, Strategic Insights on Preparing to Launch Cell and Gene Therapies. This webinar is intended to foster constructive discussion in the field of cell and gene therapies, and particularly focus on commercialization and launch of cell and gene therapies. Obviously, it's a very exciting moment for the cell and gene therapy industry. Over the last decade, there has been significant promise that has been raised, and obviously we've seen exciting clinical results and outcome of various cell and gene therapies focused on treating devastating diseases, cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. Despite the significant challenges that are associated with cell and gene therapies, obviously the solution that cell and gene therapy bring to the table is very promising, and is exciting to see that the several organizations are actually moving towards commercialization and launch of cell and gene therapies. However, there are some challenges, as I mentioned, that need to be discussed and need to be addressed. These challenges could be partly associated with the manufacturing CMC, but also the evolving regulatory landscape. How do we go about the preparation for launch and IND submission? And also, so these are some of the topics that we would like to discuss. Today, we are very pleased to have senior leadership of two leading companies in the field of cell and gene therapies to share their perspective and experience in preparation for launch of cell and gene therapies. We plan to focus on the journey moving from clinical to commercial and talk about commercialization readiness activities in preparation for launch of cell and gene therapies. In particular, we will be focusing on some topics such as access to therapies, engaging providers, patient access and affordability, as well as manufacturing and CMC topics as much as possible. I recognize that these are wide topics and might require significant time, but hopefully we'll have very good discussions. And I hope that you enjoy, and we look forward to also hearing from you and some questions that we could share with great panelists on this webinar. So before starting the panel discussion, I wanted to have a brief introduction of our great panelists. So we have Tom Klima, Chief Commercial and Operating Officer of Bluebird Bio. Tom joined the Bluebird Bio team in May of 2021 as Chief Commercial Officer, and he has deep passion for patient and experience across multiple commercial roles in both rare disease and oncology. Most recently, Tom served as Chief Commercial Officer at Gamida Cell, leading a high-growth, fast-paced oncology cell therapy organization and establishing a culture of transparency, trust, and empowerment. Prior to his tenure at Gamida, Tom served in a variety of leadership roles at Atara Biotherapeutics, Navida Biopharmaceuticals, and Algeta US, where he led the successful commercial build-out and launch of Sofigo. Before Algeta, he had various commercial leadership positions at Dendria. Tom began his pharmaceutical career at Eli Lilly, where he had several positions of increasing responsibilities and participated in the global launch of Kimbalta. Tom earned a BA in Business Administration and Marketing from Western State College. We also have Kinnari Patel, President and Chief Operating Officer of Rocket Pharma. Kinnari is President and Chief Operating Officer of Rocket, and she oversees the regulatory, clinical execution, global program teams, alliance management, CMC, quality, and development organization. She has 15 years of rare disease research and development experience, including in regulatory science, pharmacovigilance, policy, and quality compliance, gained at leading pharmaceutical companies, including AstraZeneca, BMS, Novartis, Roche, and Pfizer. She has led both small molecule and biologic development programs from phase 1 or to the late phases across multiple therapies areas, including immuno-oncology, oncology, respiratory, virology, transplantation, and metabolism. Most notably, Kinnari has worked on Opdivo from phase 1 through BLA filing for metastatic melanoma. RCC, NSCLC submitted and gained approval of Myelta for ultra-rare diseases and submitted Walside NDA for prevention of cytomegalovirus disease in pediatric kidney and heart transplant patients. Kinnari received a dual degree of BS in biology and doctorate of pharmacy from U Science in Philadelphia. She also completed a 2-year postdoctoral regulatory affairs fellowship through Rutgers University. Additionally, she received her executive MBA from NYU Stern School of Business with a specialization in corporate finance, leadership, and strategy. Most recently, she graduated from C-Suite Harvard Business School Advanced Management Program. In her spare time, Kinnari has a passion for mentoring, teaching, and volunteering for nonprofit organizations. This is an exciting and amazing panelist, and I would like to first ask the esteemed panel to introduce themselves. And along the introduction, if you don't mind, also sharing some perspective, strategic perspective of your company and key considerations relevant to the topic that we are discussing today, which is launch preparations. And if you can also shed light a little bit about the market access, engaging providers, CMC, and manufacturing. I appreciate your time and contribution, and we will start with you, Tom, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
No, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tim and Arm, for putting this together. I think this is an exciting time in cell and gene therapy, and forums like this are increasingly important as we learn from each other. Thanks, Behnam, for hosting the event and sponsoring the event. And I see the building behind you that we actually manufacture Zynteglo and Skysoda in, so keep it going there, please. And thanks, Kinnari. It's obviously we have a great partnership with you guys in terms of learning and sharing with each other. So it's great to continue that partnership, and really nice to be here today. As you guys have mentioned, I think this is just an incredibly exciting time for the field in gene therapy. And for bluebird gene therapy, after more than a decade of fighting to get to where we are today, gene therapy is really coming to fruition in the commercial setting, where we're actually able to bring our 3 approved gene therapies to patients more broadly in the commercial setting. So just an exciting time. Our mission has always been to focus on delivering for patients in need and bringing more bluebird days, which really means better days ahead for patients. And that's really been our mission. And if you just back up, it seems like it was not that long ago, but in August of 2022, our first approval came for Zynteglo in beta thalassemia, an important indication there where patients really are going in every 2 to 5 weeks for red blood cell transfusions, and they're have a pretty poor quality of life. So that was a great first approval. Secondly, right after that, in September of last year, Skysoda was approved for CALD, which is obviously very devastating, and patients progress very rapidly and ultimately die, unfortunately. So a great option for boys with CALD. And then just recently in December of last year, Lyfgenia for people living with sickle cell disease, which is something that we've been really focused on and fighting for a long time in a patient population that is really suffering, I think, underappreciated and often ignored. So very excited for that approval. And then just recently, we announced our first start for Lyfgenia, which was reported in the New York Times a few weeks ago, but just a huge milestone for bluebird and for patients living with sickle cell disease. And just real briefly, our strategy has always been on 3 key pillars. It's been focusing on patients, number 1, and making sure that patients have access, and access is a huge word that we can talk about, to our therapies. Number 2, our providers, or we call them qualified treatment centers, or QTCs, and the associated network. And then payers, making sure that payers understand the value of one-time curative therapies and really understand how we think about pricing along with outcomes-based agreements. And then all of that is tied together through our key partnerships. Obviously, the supply chain, manufacturing plays a huge role in making sure that we're tied at the hip with our key partners, in this case at Lonza. So very happy to be here today, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tom. Kinnari, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for hosting us here. And I love the fact that our organization is bringing these types of topics forward, because at Rocket, we really believe that only way we can move forward as an entire industry to do such innovative, cutting edge technology that patients absolutely have a huge unmet medical need is by curiosity and collaboration. So I love the fact that we're able to share information, learn from each other, and make a better future for the patients that really need it. So at Rocket Pharmaceuticals, we're a company that started about 8 years ago, and I've had the honor of being part of it from employee number 3 to now becoming 300 some. And what we focus on is seeking gene therapy cures for rare genetic life-threatening diseases focused in bone marrow-derived diseases or cardiovascular diseases. We believe that gene therapy truly has the power to change a person's life in their DNA. If it's mutated, missing, is not their destiny, right? We aim to provide really a gene therapy treatment option for unmet medical need where patients have no other treatment options. Most of the disease we work on, the only treatment option available is either a bone marrow transplant or if a patient's lucky enough for a heart transplant. So Rocket's really focused on advancing these drugs, and we are platform agnostic in a sense that We have 6 programs that are being disclosed publicly across our ex vivo LNT programs, and those are more in the later stages. And I'll go into a little more detail on that. And we also have in vivo AAV cardiovascular portfolio. So what we try to do is try as quickly as possible to work with all of the ecosystem, from patient advocacy, treating physicians, CDMOs, as well as health authorities, to come up with a strategy that makes sense. And our goal is really simple. We want to come up and make sure we have the highest quality product to every single patient we treat, starting from phase 1 onwards, because each patient's treatment really counts towards benefit risk. And if we do this well for 10, 15, 20 patients that are in the clinical studies, we can make this therapy available efficiently and effectively to patients, hundreds and thousands of patients around the world that need it. Our notable component for Rocket Pharma, it's an exciting year for us, and this is why I love this topic that we're part of today's conversation. We're transitioning from an R&D organization focused on science, preclinical, manufacturing, clinical, to now commercial stage. We have our first program under review with FDA, Kisqali, for severe leukocyte adhesion deficiency, LAD-1. And this program is very near and dear to my heart because, unfortunately, in the severe form of LAD-1, 2/3 of the kids pass away by the age of 2. So talk about devastating, right? These patients absolutely need this therapy and the highest quality therapy possible. So we've submitted the BLA, and the PDUFA date for that is coming up on June 30th, 2024. In the meanwhile, we've also submitted Fanconi anemia, which is another devastating disease that's impacting children around the world. And we've submitted that MAA in the EU, which is currently under review, and the US BLA to follow in the next few months. So those are our LNT portfolios. For us, whether we think about AAV or ex vivo LNT, our 3 focused area is simple. 1, we have to learn from patients. A lot of these rare diseases, understanding the disease and the natural history of the disease is so important. So to learn directly from patients what's important to them and embedding that into our clinical trials is really critical. Success number 2, we've learned a lot from our experts in the field that have gone ahead of us, Bluebird, Avexis, and others, where CMC cannot be an afterthought. So having the highest quality commercial grade manufacturing as early as possible into the clinic is really critical. And number 3, what we're learning very actively, it's payer and access matters just as much as CMC. So thinking about that, when you submit a BLA, it's too late. So thinking about a holistic approach, not just to clinical trials, but how do you get every patient that needs access to the therapy as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible by gathering as much data as possible for these diseases early on in the clinical development is really critical. So I think for us, those 3 things are really key to success, we believe. And I still believe what's really exciting is one and done potentially curative gene therapy. I mean, that is brilliant. So I think we cheer each other on and we support each other in the industry, and we want to share many lessons we've learned, also as many successes we've had, because 12 or 13 drugs that are approved in the US, it's a great start. Well, we need to get to thousands and get there very, very quickly. So I'm hoping that webinars like this will help us all learn with each other, share information, and get there so patients don't have to wait.
Thank you, Kinnari. Yeah, I can't agree more. At the end of the day, the focus is the patient and the patient story, and what do we do to make patients' life different. And obviously, launch activities and preparation to launch could be very challenging. Now, journey to move from clinical to commercial, there are a lot of different considerations when it comes to the IND application and submission. I would like to ask maybe, Kinnari, if you don't mind, shed light some of the challenges and considerations that you have or your organization has in preparation for IND submission. If you can highlight some of the key focus areas.
Definitely. For us, IND submissions, when we think about IND, it's not just about, let's get the preclinical models done, right? We try to think about what is the most efficient path towards an approval of a drug. And when you have a long-term view in that perspective, a lot of the decisions you make, even before an IND, I'd rather take a 1-year delay in an IND submission in order to ensure every patient gets the highest quality product. We avoid the need for comparability studies as much as possible, especially in humans. And we can easily get this data package, which makes sense from a clear benefit risk quality perspective, to health authorities to really get it approved. So when we think about that, LAD-1 is a good example of this. We actually ended up taking a 1-year delay in starting our IND because we said, hey, if we get the commercial product in, what will happen is if we have a commercial grade plasmid vector cell processing and centralized analytics from day one, every patient will get the commercial product, which means we can have less number of patients being treated in clinical studies and negotiate with both FDA, EMA, and MHRA. How do we do that? So LED1, we were able to negotiate a phase 1/2 study of just 9 patients because we were able to have the CMC components in place. And I think that made a world of difference. The second thing we thought about is you don't want to design a clinical study where endpoints, if you don't understand the disease well, how do you design a study that has endpoints that you can actually tell if the drug is working or not as quickly as possible, but also see the durability over time? So before we even got an IND submitted, the second thing we did is actually our CMO and myself went to many of the sites around the world where patients with LED1 were being treated. And unfortunately, most of them were passing away. And we got to meet with the treating physician, some family members that had lost kids, and learn what's important to them and how devastating the disease is. By doing that, we were able to incorporate endpoints that matter to these patients, rates of infections, quality of life, number of times they had to be hospitalized, and the fact that having that devastating nature of the natural history be understood allowed us to have a comparator so we don't have to have a controlled arm or placebo arm, right? We could use that data package with the natural history serving as a control arm in order to get this BLA submitted. And what's really cool is I've been a 20-year regulator and I've worked on 7 drugs for submission and approval before coming to Rocket. I've never had an opportunity to work on a potential one and done curative treatment option, let alone even a small molecule that goes from first in human IND to BLA in less than 5 years. So to be able to do that, to me, ended up being some of the keys to success that we like to share to other companies saying, hey, and academics, think about your product, think about the history and what's important. And the third thing we found was really critical. Every step of the way, we talked to the EMA, FDA, and MHRA, almost patient by patient, to talk about the data and what's important. I think that makes a world of a difference.
Very, very nice, very exciting. And Tom, from your perspective, you've successfully launched cell and gene therapy products. Anything else to add in terms of challenges and considerations?
Yeah, certainly a lot of challenges as you go through the process. I think one of the mistakes, and I think Kinnari said it perfectly, but one of the mistakes I've seen companies make is they think about things sequentially. It's, just get through the IND enablement phase, just get to the BLA phase, just get through the AdCom, just get through the approval. The reality is that a launch is really a 5 or 6 year process. It's not a one-time, snapshot in time. And so a lot of the prep that you have to do, as Kinnari mentioned, is going out and making sure that you're not only looking at things that are ultimately going to get your therapies approved, but also making sure that once you get those therapies approved, they're going to be clinically meaningful in the real world. And, even us, we were like, get through the AdCom, celebrate, wait, now it's just getting, real. And now we got to gear up for a launch. And then FDA approval comes. And then, it's really a sequential 4 or 5 year period, at least, where you need to do everything in parallel. And as Kinnari mentioned, that includes working with patients and understanding what's meaningful to them, working with the qualified treatment centers. Let's face it, qualified treatment centers are dealing with dozens of cell and gene therapies right now. And, more than that, if you include clinical trials. So making sure that as you think about how to bring therapies forward to patients, you do that through qualified treatment centers. You really have to understand what they're going to need and want, from their perspective as they add more cell and gene therapy. So it's just a holistic, time-bound approach that needs to be considered.
Indeed. Maybe I wanted to ask a question when it comes to the patient and target patient population, and on the technical side, there are questions and probably challenges around the scaling considerations. If you don't mind, each of you can shed some light on your approach towards the scaling with respect to the target population, and how do you go about by this challenge? And maybe we can start with you, Tom, and then Kinnari, you can add as well.
Yeah, that's an important consideration, obviously first and foremost for patients and trying to understand who are the patients that might want to be treated first or that might want to wait to see how gene therapy goes. But also when you think about just scaling through your qualified treatment center network or your manufacturing capacity, because of some of the issues with some of the CAR Ts, we often get asked about manufacturing capacity. But let me start with the patients. First we had some smaller, more targeted patient populations with CLD. That's really 40 to 50 boys a year that will be impacted and potentially available for therapy. So that's a relatively small patient population. And then with beta thalassemia, that's about 1,500 in the US that are impacted. About 850 might be available for gene therapy or eligible for gene therapy. So, with us, we at least had the luxury, if you will, of thinking about our scale based on the patient populations. And then we really thought about the synergies between those indications. And then ultimately, as we set up our network for sickle cell disease, which is over 100,000 patients in the US living with sickle cell disease, and about 20,000 that could be eligible for gene therapy. So when we looked at our qualified treatment center network, we last year at this time had about 15 qualified treatment centers. Right now we have 64 as of our last public announcement. So we really had to think about scaling up our QTC network synergistically and getting ready for the sickle cell launch. Manufacturing capacity is another one where you really want to make sure you're scaling as you see demand come in, because frankly it's expensive, and you don't want to pay for a lot of manufacturing capacity that's just sitting there unused. So you make plans years in advance to think about how you scale up manufacturing capacity, including vector supply, and then you grow as you see the demand come in. And we announced recently that we're expanding our capacity at Lonza for beta thalassemia and CLD for Scotsonans and Taglo, because the demand is there. And we're in a situation right now that's ideal for us because we have a short wait list right now as we wait to hear back from the FDA to hopefully expand our manufacturing capacity soon. So you really have to just think about it holistically, and your network includes everything from the patients through the QTCs and your supply chain and manufacturing facilities.
Thank you. And Kinnari, would you like to add something, please?
I think one thing in rare disease, what I find is, sometimes people are saying, hey, are there enough patients, right? What I found is, like the case study from going back 20 years ago at Novartis, right? When you're in ultra rare diseases, if there's no treatment option, people may opt not to actually get genetic testing done. So what we realize is by the time we start clinical studies, we want to work with patient foundations, not just for the diseases that we work with, but also other foundations like the Jeffrey Modell's Foundation that are working on newborn screening state by state. And when we work with those types of foundations, we found that increasing genetic testing, which seems to be lagging behind a lot in the US, if we increase that, when clinical data becomes available, and ideally by the time of commercial products launch, you have a huge pool of patients, both from the incidence and prevalence perspective, that are actually lined up and ready to go. So I think what I found is really critical is not just about patient advocacy and embedding into clinical studies and recruitment, but embedding it into our commercial organization, medical affairs organization. In medical affairs, to me, it's very unique to rare disease, but especially unique and special to cell and gene therapy. The stronger your medical affairs organization is, the more they can actually educate how gene therapy works, whether it's ex vivo lenti, AAV, in vivo, et cetera. And they can help anxiety for the patients that are first and foremost enrolling or trying the studies, right? Or in the commercial organization or commercially being treated. But then the second thing that's really becomes critical is how do you expand the knowledge of genetic testing, early diagnosis? Because the components, a lot of cell and gene therapy products, the earlier you treat, not only will it treat, but it could also help prevent a disease from happening and all the manifestation of a disease. So to me, that's the only additional component. I agree with the ecosystem of CMC and all of that coming together. But we need to make it easier and better for patients to get diagnosed early as possible. And I think if we can do that, we can also link that up with the commercial success and access to patients before it's too late for them.
Just to add to that, I think there's something to be said about when you define a successful launch in gene therapy. And if you look at the media or you hear investors, they often will say that there's a failed launch or launch is going slower than expected. The commercial process is different than the clinical trial experience, and it takes time. It takes time for patients to get into the system. It takes time for patients to get comfortable with gene therapy, and then just the process is longer. If you look at our therapies for sickle cell disease, once the patient goes through kind of the medical readiness period, which is usually a couple of months, their insurance gets approved, we collect cells, and then it's about 100 days between cell collection and when we're ready to ship the therapy back to the hospital for the infusion. Then they come back in for the infusion. So this is not a traditional oncology launch where you see, immediate movement. I think we can help educate, the field and the rest of the world on what a successful launch looks like. And part of what we've done is to point to some of the leading indicators, like, how many qualified treatment centers do we have, and does that match up with the patient population? Very quickly, then we shifted to patient starts, because patient starts is a key metric for us, at least in terms of what the launch is looking like. And then ultimately, revenue is delayed until infusion. So, people expect that you're going to see revenue in the first quarter or second quarter, and that's just not the case.
Very important. I fully agree. I think another angle that I would like to have your views is actually patient delivery and robust delivery to the patient, and along the line of manufacturing robustness, and how do you ensure that the patients get the treatment during the clinical. Obviously, this is going to be a requirement for the commercial. Would like to have your thoughts, Kinnari, Tom, on the patient delivery, and maybe if you can just shed light on the from the angle of manufacturing robustness and any other considerations that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, and it takes a village to really succeed, especially for ex vivo NT. I didn't appreciate or realize until we started really treating patients, not just US, but Europe and other places, and getting patients from the world to come and participate. I think a couple of things that I think really is critical when you think about commercialization is you have to just, from everything from cell bank to plasmids, to stability testing on the plasmids, to vector production. It all has to be ready and well-oiled machine to getting the patients in ex vivo, specifically getting the apheresis product to CDMOs that are commercial grade, and then getting the vector there and the manufacturing. Ideally, in 100 days, you can release the product for infusion to patients, right? So that whole coordination, it's almost like I think of it as our CEO is a Grammy award-winning musician. So we kind of think of this as a musician's orchestra, right? We have to orchestrate and manage everything. I think what goes a long way and could help avoid hiccups is if you have commercial grade partners, CDMOs that you work with. If you're not doing it in-house, doing it with commercial grade CDMOs, really having their experience and leveraging what has worked with them and what could work for you, I think makes sense. A lot of the cell and gene therapy companies are also, their first product is not always the biggest program, right? For Rocket, for example, we have the luxury where, the devastating disease of LED1 is our smallest program of number of patients impacted, and thank goodness, because we don't want patients to die by the age of 2. But what we're trying to do is we learn from one region. We have CDMO partners that expand the globe of US and Europe. But if we're launching this in the US, we consider this a soft launch. By having few QTC centers, commercial things we worked out, by the time we have Fanconi anemia, which is a much larger population, to PKD, which is even larger, to Danon, which is even larger, right? Incrementally, we can learn from the ecosystem of CMC, manufacturing, analytics, testing, and how we can go from maybe treating one patient every few months to treating multiple patients in a month, and do that with our CDMO partners as a way to collaborate, be curious, but also learn from experience that Bluebird has and other companies have to figure out how do we do this more efficiently, effectively, right? So I think CMC is really critical. I think there are other couple of things there to think about just outside, because I'm in the ARM webinar and I know the amazing work they're doing with policy front. I do want to say, thinking about what tests are really required for release. Do you need a test like an RCL, right? What's the value after you have 300, 400 patients worth of data available in ex vivo? Because something like that could actually change the 100 days to become 60 days, right? Or less for patients to get the treatment back. So thinking about policies and tests and analytics is also very critical. So to me, when CMC comes into play, it's not just about manufacturing, it's about the analytics that go hand in hand with it. And the quality of the analytics really make a world of a difference. So that's how I think about it from our perspective.
Yeah,
I think that was very well said. And just to add to it, now you can plan all you want, ahead of a launch, but then you get into the heart of a launch and things happen, things go wrong, and, things that you thought would go a certain way don't go that way. And so having a strong partner within your supply chain, and especially at the manufacturer that has skin in the game, that has the same level of passion that the company has, is very important. Because if you make a lot of mistakes early on in the process, you lose a lot of credibility in a hurry with your qualified treatment centers and with patients. And, in our clinical trials for beta thalassemia, we had to do recollections 20% of the time. So ideally, As you get into the commercial setting, you like to lower that number and make sure that it's as efficient as possible. And there's nothing like delivering well for patients, and there's also nothing like sitting there having to tell a physician that they have to come back in for a recollection because of a manual error or because of an error that they just can't quite understand. And they get really upset because they have to call the patient who they talked into going through the therapy and ask them to come back in for a second collection or whatever the case might be for some whatever reason. So as part of this, you have to be able to adjust and you have to be able to learn. Thankfully, we have a strong partner with Lonza, and we have strong QTCs that partner with us early on. You have to be as transparent as possible and tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly as soon as you can so that they can communicate effectively with their patients as part of the process.
Yeah, thank you. I think you both highlighted very important aspects, of course, on the CMC side, and I fully agree with you, Kinnari. I think we often talk about the manufacturing process and robustness, but we do not speak enough about the importance of analytic and testing, because without analytic and testing, there is no robustness. There is no even definition of robustness. Fully agree. You also highlighted, both of you, importance of the partnership and finding the right partner to work with. CDMO is important. I wanted to ask you, as a person who is obviously partnered with you in the journey, what are some of the key considerations and your thoughts on selection of the right partner and right CDMO? Obviously, you mentioned some of those. If you don't mind just highlighting some for the audience, for those who are interested or they are effectively working in this field, what are the key considerations from your perspective? Kinnari, Tom, either one can go ahead.
Sure. So one of the unique things of being in a biotech, in a very small biotech 8 years ago, is one person gets to wear multiple hats. So I was actually a QA auditor for the company. So I had a chance to not only audit all these sites and see them, but also look at the contracts and negotiate, right? So that kind of gives a very unique perspective. But I think each company has to make their own decision of how much they can invest upfront. And I highly recommend, let's not let CMC and market access be an afterthought. It really needs to be thought about from day one. But your investment capacity might be different, right? So to me, what was really critical for us to select the partner is we want to make sure a partner, because we were looking at these devastating diseases with no treatment options impacting kids, we said, how do we get the highest quality product to each and every patient that we treat in the clinical study, not just by the time we're in commercialization. So where feasible, how do we get a process that's commercial grade? Meaning, do we have a vendor that we selected that has gone through FDA and or EMA inspections, right? That was important to us. Because our studies, phase 2 studies tend to be global across US, Europe, and UK, we want to make sure our partner had access in both regions, especially in ex vivo lenti, so they can actually get the product in and it doesn't get stuck in a customs somewhere across the pond, kind of going to London and other places. So to us, location was important, that was important. But third thing that made a difference for us is the quality of the team, right? Being there in person and meeting team members that are like-minded, that are, everyone can be an expert, but we're such in forefront of innovation that we all need to be very curious and humble and learn from each other. So to have partners that shared our values, and for Rocket, our guiding principles are really, it's about gaining and earning trust and maintaining trust. It's about generosity, sharing what you can every step of the way. And it's about curiosity. So if we learn from others and ask questions, it can actually help us elevate the industry and everything we do. So we wanted partners that actually shared those values and that were open and connected. Last and least, which is most critical, and you see it in the back of my screen share, every story is the patient that we treated at Rocket. So we wanted our partners to understand the impact of our patients. So we've done webinars where we shared patient perspective to our CDMOs, but we want to make sure when we talked about it initially when visiting various CDMOs, it mattered to them. When I saw CDMOs that lit up, thinking about patient impact and the work they do and how meaningful it is for families, that made a world of a difference.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kinnari said. I think, to boil it down, it's quality and experience, making sure that you have an experienced team that understands the process. It's consistency. You want to make sure that you can consistently deliver, do what you say you're going to do. And then it's flexibility and being nimble. And when we see mistakes or we see something that's not going as optimal as it should, then we can adjust and make tweaks. It doesn't mean anything, anyone's doing anything wrong necessarily. It just means that we need to continuously improve things and make sure we're delivering for patients at the end of the day consistently.
Nicely said, and I fully agree. I think at the end of the day, this is a genuine and true partnership that is, there will be learning experience, but you need to feel that both parties are coming together and deliver the patients and to the patients. And patient stories are actually very, very strong. I've seen both from Rocket and Bluebird Bio, very strong patient stories and highly motivating, even for the team on the floor who is working on the manufacturing. This is incredible stories that I've seen from both of your organizations. Now I would like to switch gears a little bit and focus on preparation for launch and commercialization readiness. Obviously, we know that there are somewhat significant differences between cell and gene therapies and more established industries. I would like to hear your thoughts. How do you make sure that you have an appropriate plan for launch? For your respective products, and strategically, how do you prepare and how do you make sure that your plan is able to get the products to the patients? We can start with you, Tom, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so for us, again, I started with the 3 pillars at the start of this webinar. It's really number one, working closely with the patient community and making sure that you understand how patients think about their disease and how they flow through the system, so to speak. If they're being treated at a hospital already, or if they're in the community, just making sure everything we do and all of our plans are centered around patients and where they are. And so then the next step is then thinking about how to bring therapy to patients and really making sure that you have a network of qualified treatment centers or hospitals where the patients are going to be treated that are in close proximity to patients, because many of them won't travel a great distance to get treated unless it's a disease like CALD. For beta thalassemia and sickle cell, we want to make sure we brought therapy to patients versus making them go to a great distance to a QTC. And setting up a qualified treatment center that is not only close to patients, but also has the expertise that they need to deliver complex gene therapies. And then obviously you can't start work on value and working with payers soon enough. And kind of tied to that, you have to work with payers. You have to think about your strategy when it comes to the value of your therapy. You have to think about price pretty early on, and then you have to think about whether or not you're going to do something like an outcomes-based agreement or what the strategy is there. And that takes years to make sure you have that strategy right and make sure that you have, I don't want to say buy-in completely, but you have a partnership with payers and that you're thinking about things in the way that they will accept them. Just going back in time, before I was at Bluebird, we used to talk about payment over time, and we used to have some things where we were excited about implementing some of these things, but payers were like, nope, we're not ready for that. So you really have to design your way of thinking about delivering value in accordance with how the outside world is going to accept them. So that work happens years in advance of FDA approval. And then small little things like you have to have we have a My Bluebird support, which is the patient services center. That takes about a year to set something like that up. Or we now have Blue Trace, which is our online ordering system and traceability for tracing cells, making sure the chain of identity, chain of custody stays intact. Again, that takes years to build a system like that. So you have to think about it from a surround sound perspective, but really, how to get it to patients, how to set up your QTC network, and then how to make sure that value is recognized and ultimately your therapies are paid for.
Thank you, Tom. Kinnari, would you like to add your thoughts, please?
Yeah, so I think everything Tom said absolutely is how we're thinking about it from more immediate launch that we have coming up for Kresladi. But when I take a step back, the only additional things I would add is our cardiovascular program, our Danon disease program. This is where for the first time we've shown that gene therapy could work for cardiac disease. So it's a whole new field of excitement, challenge, and nervousness, right? So how we're thinking about it there is for diseases like Danon disease, early on, approaching phase 2 pivotal study design and discussions with FDA, we started thinking about what matters, what are the quality of life parameters that we need to collect in order to show differentiations, caregiver impact. But the other component we started thinking about is how do we actually get these patients identified, right? So do we have ICD-10 codes in place? So working with trying to get them in place, that's really critical. And number 2, getting genetic testing to be almost like a backbone of every patient that a cardiologist might see, making that process happen. But you can't do it individually when you're a small cell and gene therapy biotech. So how do you partner with organizations like HSFA and all these other organizations and affiliates that exist, and collaborating with them in order to educate the value of genetic testing? Because these patients that have life-threatening diseases are kids. Many of them are kids. And by the time, as you know, the stat says that it takes about 5 to 7 physicians a patient goes to before they get diagnosed. Unfortunately, some of these diseases, by then a patient might pass away, or it might be too late to get a gene therapy. So we want to make sure we work foundationally as you start a phase 2 pivotal study, think about patient access, and also who are the key cardiac experts that are available across US, Europe, and other regions that can actually come in the forefront of cell and gene therapy clinical trials, but commercialization and launching them and providing educational webinars and components are also critical.
Very important. You highlighted two important topics. One, and I'd like to have your thoughts on both of them, patient access and obviously the region. So I'll go with the region first, because we know that there are differences between healthcare systems and regulatory requirements for different geographical area. In particular, I'm referring to US versus EU. I'm assuming that there should be upfront strategy around the commercialization readiness and the choice and the application of EU versus EU versus US. I would like to hear your thoughts, Kinnari. Probably we can start with you. How do you go about the strategy setting when it comes to commercialization readiness for EU versus US approval?
It's a great question. I think for us, we started a few years back thinking about where are the clinical centers that we have of excellence, meaning where are the treating physicians and experts that can do this gene therapy, but also are the ones that patients go to normally when they get diagnosed with X, Y, and Z disease. So that became our baseline for everything. And then what we ended up doing is, I'm an R&D person. I'm a drug developer at heart, right? Not commercial person. MBA aside, not a commercial person. I'm not a Tom. So we hired an amazing team with our chief revenue officer, and he brought in a team of experts that had done Kinnari launches and other launches in AV and Avexis and other places. So we brought in experts in-house, and we partnered with experts in the US region, but also European regions to start those payer discussions early. Because the more data we have at hand, the better we can make a strategic decision about the product, where it should launch, how quickly it should launch, and how to set up it for success, right? Because we've learned a lot from our peers, but we keep learning, and I'm sure we're going to make some mistakes. So we want to have the best minds thinking about this early as possible.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You know, I'm cheering for all of the other gene therapy companies right now outside of the US. It's pretty well known that a few years ago, we actually tried to go to Europe. We'd set up an infrastructure and a team in Europe. And ultimately, the value of gene therapy had not been recognized at the time. And I think one of the things outside the US is the value of gene therapy has yet to be recognized. And, you know, it's difficult for a small company, especially, to set up an infrastructure to go to Europe and bear that expense before you know that the value is going to be recognized. The regulatory path is quite easy outside the US. It's really getting the therapies paid for that's the challenge. And so we got set up, we got approved. Ultimately, we did not get the price that was reasonable for our gene therapies. And so we made the decision at the time to get out of Europe and withdraw, unfortunately, because there are patients in need all over the world. So I think for us, it's about, you know, as soon as we can see that the value of one-time curative therapies is being recognized outside of the US, that would be a time for us to consider going back. And until then, we're completely focused on the US. Or, you know, down the road, other mechanisms for bringing therapies outside of the US. If you think about in vivo therapies, off-the-shelf therapies, you know, if you look at cryopreserving apheresis, there are a lot of things that we can do to advance the field to get outside of the US. But in the short term, it's going to be about making sure the value is recognized outside the US.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll add one more thing to it, with the full disclosure that I am on the board of directors. So that's my disclosure. I think a lot of biotech companies, right? We're so busy just trying to wear 10 hats and do so much in-house with such little resources, right? That it feels like can't like lift your head outside of your company to do things. But I highly advocate to get organized and work with organizations like the ARM organization because we also need to work on the policy front, right? So payer and access policies are for renewals in the EU, and there's some guidelines that says, hey, you need to have controlled arms clinical study in order to justify X, Y, and Z, right? A lot of cell and gene therapy products, that's a challenge, and that's not even ethical. Forget the challenge. It's not even ethical to do a placebo-controlled study in these severe diseases. So I think where possible, I'll advocate for other companies and to get involved in policymaking, because I think to really change the future, we can do one-off things that we're all trying to do and make waves and precedents to happen. But we really need the legislation framework to be a lot better, both in US and Europe, to allow these patients to have access to these therapy and have access to life-saving therapies that have great clinical data. Because to me, the worst thing to see is I had a mom reach out and she found me at ASGCT in the past year, and she said, hey, our drug has great clinical data. And my son wants access, but unfortunately, this financial environment, the company no longer exists. How do we get access, right? So to talk to patients and family members that know that there are drugs that are working, but we're not able to bring it to them, that is a very difficult conversation. And, you know, we need to change that as a whole for the entire industry and for patients.
Thank you for that. I think this is a nice segue into my next question, which is affordability and patient access. And in fact, we had a question from the audience as well about making sure that, you know, patients have global access for patients, right? So that's a key question. Anything that you would like to add? You highlighted the importance of legislation, communities coming together, and collaboration and partnership, also making sure that these are affordable. Anything else that you would like to add, Kinnari, Tom, on the access affordability aspect of cell and gene therapies?
My ambition is, it's a lofty one. Any patient that has a disease that we work on, we want to make sure they can get access, right? The reason I say it's lofty is how do we bring the cost of goods down? How do we make it more efficient and effective for even not just developed countries like US and Europe and Australia and New Zealand, but how do we make it available where patients are actually impacted by the disease, whether it's in Asia or Middle East or South Africa, right? So to me, you know, there's some great things that are going on by organizations and even experts that are working on trying to figure out cost-efficient ways to make CAR-Ts and other therapies available in these developing regions. So I think a couple of things we can do together is, as much as possible, let's share the scientific knowledge and expertise and advancements that can make things a little easier for patients to get access. Let's work together to bring the cost of goods down. And then I think if we can actually make more therapies available, pure just business scalability, hopefully it makes access a lot easier. And it doesn't become a one-off fight every single time. And I think a lot more goes into it. But a platform approach to thinking about cell and gene therapy as a whole, from drug development to commercialization, I think will be a huge future change that we need.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kinnari said. I think also in the very short term, and again, I'm being focused on the US right now, but in the very short term, you know, you have to look at different patient populations and the coverage mix, right? So people living with sickle cell disease, unfortunately, have been underserved and, you know, just completely ignored in some cases because, you know, they are mostly covered by Medicaid. And when you look at Medicaid patient populations, a lot of bigger companies will look at that and shy away potentially. So making sure that you have strategies in place for all patients to be covered and for all patients to have access regardless of their insurance type, and then working to make sure that they understand that they might see a list price that could be a little bit disheartening, but that, you know, doesn't necessarily mean they're ever going to see that price. They're really going to work through their insurance company. It'll be covered by insurance. But you know, things like working together as a group on, you know, right now there's a CMMI model in place, demonstration model, that they're working on model and to put in place for the two companies working on sickle cell disease. Frankly, I'm a little bit worried about what that could look like, or just, you know, curious to see how this is going to pan out. But making sure that these, you know, whether it's models or things that are put in place are good for patients and good for patient access, and not the opposite. We want them to be enabling and enriching and not restrictive.
Fully agree. Very important points highlighted. You know, from working with the policymakers, you know, modeling aspects, also on the technical side, innovation platform and building platforms into the processes. Those are important considerations. I would like to also ask Kinnari, you briefly touched on the rare and ultra-rare disease, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on preparation and product launch for rare and ultra-rare disease. Is there something different that you consider, both you and Tom, if you can shed light on this aspect as well?
Yeah, when we think about different diseases and different disease populations that we're working on across AAV and ex vivo lenti, we realize our AAV population in the cardiovascular field, we have Danon disease, and then we have PKP2 in the clinic and BAG3 indication. These are, if you add these up, each of them could be north of 15 to 30,000, up to 100,000 patients. So when we think about the scale of patients that are impacted by the disease, we took a step back saying, what are we going to do in-house? What are we going to outsource? And how do we do this centrally, right? So to us, I think I would ask each team members and leaders to think about what makes sense to you when in the life cycle of your company. It's really critical based on the access that you need and the production and the scale that you need to invest in, right? And some of these things we can do with the CDMO, other things we felt like, hey, we could do it in-house. We have great CDMO partners in AAV, but let's do it in-house, because if we need to scale up to treat 30,000 patients a year, it's easier to have 2 shifts, 3 shifts in-house coming up. And we have brilliant scientists, so we got lucky there as well. So I think thinking about it from a different perspective of ultra-rare diseases, when I think of ultra-rare disease, I want to make sure, is there synergy? So I want to use the same CDMO or the same infrastructure across all my ultra-rare diseases. So when I get through a BLA inspections or in commercialization, QTC setups, and the chain of custody, chain of identity, it stays static, right? So it's just plug and play of different transgene or different therapy, but it's not plug and play of different CDMOs on top of different diseases and different populations. So where possible, we try to think about synergies and scalability.
Thank you. Tom, would you like to add something there?
No, I agree with everything she said, so that makes perfect sense.
Very good. We have a few minutes. There is one question that is actually close to my heart. I've been working on the technical side and data for the last 20 years on cell and gene therapies. And I wanted to ask that question, the importance of the data package, I think you mentioned. And particularly, I want to focus on, effective design and delivery of therapies and demonstrating the effectiveness of the cell and gene therapy products when it comes to presenting that to the regulatory agencies. How do you go about that? What is your recommendation for the folks out there? And Tom, you can start, and then Kinnari, you can continue. I think this would be our last question.
It's Kinnari's expertise, so I'm going to defer to her. But I will tell you that, what I will say is that obviously you want to make sure you're working closely with the regulatory agencies to make sure that you're hitting the, requests that they have, and sometimes they evolve over time. But ultimately, as a commercial person, you want to make sure that, as Kinnari said early on, you want to make sure that you're putting things into play that ultimately enable access for the broadest group of patients as possible. And some of the mistakes that you can make early on really pan out over the course of 8 or 10 years. And now as a commercial person, you're sitting here going, why in the world did they put that in there? Or why didn't they include this? Or why didn't they include that? So, the downstream impact of some of the early decisions can be tremendous. So I'll let Kinnari speak to it, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I've learned is, regulatory framework, CFR, there's one CFR that guides small molecules, biologic cell and gene therapy, right? And while guidances have started coming into play a lot more in the last few years, there's still only a handful of guidances available. So I think my recommendation to everyone thinking about an IND to a BLA package is have as many discussions as possible with health authority every step of the way, and talk to them about your unique product, right? Because the data package I have for one BLA, it's not the same as the second one, because you have to be specific to your disease, your data package, and working with your CDMOs, they have experiences if you're working with a CDMO. And if you're not working with a CDMO, just, people say, oh, who's your best expert advisor? And I'm like, FDA. And they're like, what? I'm like, if I have questions, I'll just take our data to the FDA and say, hey, we have RMAT designation. Can you talk to us and guide us, right? Having frequent, open, transparent discussions makes a big difference in the quality of the data package. But don't be afraid to just create the package that makes sense for you based on your disease and biology of the disease and the product you're manufacturing.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our webinar. Genuinely appreciate very productive conversation, your insight into this important topic. I thank ARM for hosting us in this webinar series, and I do hope that we'll continue this conversation. This is indeed needed for the field of cell and gene therapy and industrialization of cell and gene therapy and making it accessible for a wide range of patients. Thank you very much for your time and contribution. Thank you to the audience, and thank you all for a great webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.